Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, we look into how all lives don't matter. Let's get started. Many of my listeners probably have heard the term all lives matter before. This term, which was made famous in 2014 in the United States in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. For those people who maybe are a little less educated on this topic, if you maybe aren't from the United States or you don't keep up with the news, following the death of Michael Brown and Eric Gardner in the United States, two African-American men who were killed at the hands of police, there was a huge movement across the United States called Black Lives Matter. Now, I don't want to go too much into the Black Lives Matter movement. It has been questionable at times, depending on who you talk to. There were even times when certain chapters, which are independent from each other, posted pro-Palestine, pro-October 7th content, which obviously is a big issue. But we're going to put that aside for now and just talk about the movement and the ideology as a whole, not necessarily everybody who espouses those ideas. The Black Lives Matter movement began, or at least purported to be, about the idea that we need to, as a society, as a world, talk about the issues of systemic racism against Afro-Caribbean people in the West, but especially in the United States, and especially at the hands of police. Again, I'm not going to really get into this issue because it's not my field of expertise, but simply pointing out the idea that Black lives matter, that they shouldn't just be thrown away as it's no big deal that this is happening, which makes sense and is a very good cause, in theory, because, of course, Black lives do matter. However, in response to this growing movement of why we should talk about alleged systemic racism within the police in the United States, it was met with all lives matter. The concept that some people purported to suggest that who cares what people's color is? Everybody's lives matter, and all people who are facing issues with policing, being harmed by police, should be talked about equally. Which, again, in theory, by its basic understanding, is very much true. But that's not exactly the point of the Black Lives Matter movement, nor the All Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement was to simply point out one specific issue with one specific group that it deserved to be talked about. The All Lives Matter group didn't actually care about all lives. Their intention was to simply put the Black Lives Matter back in a group of other people. Let's not talk about the specifics. Let's just say all lives matter and call it a day. It really wasn't genuine and a hope to actually care about all lives. It was simply a way to dilute the issue of Black Lives Matter by pretending, let's just talk about everything. And we end up doing pretty much nothing. Now, many of my listeners might be asking why the heck I'm talking about Black Lives Matter. What does that have to do with the Jewish community? What does that have to do with my typical field of expertise? And it's a good question. But there is something happening now that happened in the last few weeks that I think is very important and very similar to this Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter argument. So on this week's podcast, I thought it'd be a good idea to talk about the Jewish version of All Lives Matter, because this is currently happening. Over the last 10 years, we have seen a massive uptick of anti-Semitic attacks, especially within the last 3 due to the October 7th attack. For example, over the last 10 years in the United States, the anti-Semitic attacks and hate crimes has increased 893%. United Kingdom is up 200%. France, almost 100%. Australia and Canada are around 400%. And Spain, 350%. These are incredible numbers. And factor in that many people don't even report anti-Semitic hate crimes because they see them as no big deal. They're just everyday incidents where someone calls you a name. Those don't get reported. So these numbers could be even higher. So while we see this incredible rise in anti-Semitism, the issue that we're seeing is governments not taking it very seriously. We've talked about that on the podcast before. Places like the UK, Australia, France, and especially Canada have not taken this very seriously. They pay lip service, they pretend to care, but really, they don't do anything to stop it. And worse, it seems, is some of these liberal governments, like in Canada, Australia, Spain, seem to be leaning in to the anti-Semitic people because they know that those numbers are pretty big. Anti-Semitism is on the rise, more people are doing it, more voters, so let me lean into that. Who cares really about the 0.2% of Jews? Their votes are somewhat meaningless. What we really need is the Western useful idiot vote, and we need the pro-Hamas vote. So while we are seeing this incredible, obvious rise of anti-Semitic hate, no one really seems to be willing to call out the reality of why it's happening. The fact that people are allowing it to continue and supporting those who perpetuate it. It comes with great difficulty to tell you something that's a little bit personal. For much of my life, going back many, many years, I have been a huge fan of a specific band called the Dave Matthews Band. This is a band from the United States, a great band. I used to go to all of the concerts. I loved the band, and I honestly loved Dave Matthews. As a musician, as a human being, I thought he was great. I will be honest, when he started at his concerts openly calling for peace and ceasefire in Gaza, using all of the fake talking points, it kind of got to me. I tried to not do the whole cancel thing, but in reality, the more he kept doing it publicly, without talking about the other side at all, ever, I decided that I would just personally choose to listen to other music. After dozens of years of being a huge fan, I just stopped listening completely because I couldn't take a person like that very seriously. And it wasn't because he was talking about poor Gazan people. Sure, that I can deal with. It's the fact that he literally never spoke about the Jewish people and what they're dealing with. It's this ideology that for some reason we can just do all lives matter. Sure, I can call out the issue in Gaza and just ask for all peace, and that helps everybody. But essentially, he's ignoring the reality of the Jewish people, living under missile fire, rocket fire, terrorist attacks, not a single word. By saying we just want to end all war and have a ceasefire, leaving Hamas in place, that is my way of supporting the Israeli children. But that doesn't really work. It really doesn't support the Israeli children who will be living in the next 10 years under another war and rockets from Hamas because you wanted a ceasefire. Not to mention, also leaving those Gazan people to be in a war in about 5 years when Hamas does this again, because you clearly don't understand the conflict. So I will be honest, I was a little surprised to hear in the news this past week, at one of his concerts on stage, apparently did an apology to the Jewish community. Apparently he was planning on apologizing for the way that he had acted. I was shocked. I was excited. I was happy, finally. A man like Dave Matthews, who has many Jewish friends, most notably Adam Sandler, who he's worked with many times, a very strong and proud Jew. But I'm going to play for you right now the statement that he made. Not in its entirety, but the gist of it. This is Dave Matthews in Raleigh, North Carolina, reading a prepared statement from a piece of paper.
Don't try to make it a secret that I disagree with the policies of Israel and the United States and our treatment of the civilian population in Gaza and the West Bank. But that should by no means be twisted into anybody thinking that I am bigoted or anti-Semitic in any way at all. On the contrary, I have a deep respect and love for all of my life that I can remember, and an admiration for the culture and history of the Jewish people. I don't think any group of people have contributed more to the advancement and the evolution of our understanding of each other and of the world around us. So many of my closest, dearest friends, I hold the Jewish people in the highest regard, and it breaks my heart that my opinions, born out of deep commitment to non-violent resolution and resistance, can be twisted in to serve any hateful or racist or bigoted ideas. And I am so sorry for any misunderstanding or pain caused, I might have caused, but my intention is to help bring an end to the seemingly endless violence in the world. I wanted to just mention, I don't know if I should, but I'm going to. On October 7th, 2.5 years ago, I was attending my dearest friend's son's bar mitzvah, and it was a beautiful day of witnessing and respect and love for this young man. And it was interrupted by the horror and the violence on the other side of the world, an ongoing horror. But the violence born out of that day against the Palestinian people is no less horrific and multiplies the death and the suffering over and over.
I kind of wonder what you, as my listener, thought of that apology, because I can tell you what I felt when I first saw this. For what was supposed to be an apology to the Jewish community, it seemed like a lot of equivocation, justification, and a little bit of all lives matter. Sure, anti-Semitism is bad, but apparently this apology that's supposed to be for the Jewish community was like 80% pro-Palestine, anti-Israel. He used all of the typical talking points, made it seem like I don't hate Jews, I just hate Israeli government, all of the typical things we see from the supposed pro-Palestine movement. But what I thought was incredibly interesting is the way that he said, I probably shouldn't say this, followed by talking about October 7th. Why shouldn't you say this? What's the problem when your fan base apparently loves you to talk about Palestine all the time, mentioning the reality that is October 7th? Why is that so dangerous? Because you know they don't like it? Because they like to pretend it never happened? Or that it's not a justification, as he said himself? So needless to say, I was incredibly disappointed. This wasn't an apology. This was simply justifying that he feels like he's doing the right thing. He's not blaming Jews. He has many Jewish friends. And in the end, the Palestinian Arabs, their lives matter. Or as he's trying to say, all lives matter. But the most pathetic thing that he said was that he's so sad and concerned that people are using his pro-Palestine words, his anti-war words, and using it to fuel their anti-Semitism. Meanwhile, you are literally saying the talking points that is leading to the anti-Semitism. The genocide talk, the ethnic cleansing, the famine, all of these things you're saying on stage to your crowd is what is indeed fueling the anti-Semitism. And you did it in your apology for fueling the anti-Semitism. Talk about a complete lack of awareness of the fact that you are part of the problem. Don't get me wrong. I honestly don't believe he's anti-Semitic. I don't believe that he actually hates Jews or wants to promote these ideas. And his apology about being upset to hear that his talking points are being used to fuel anti-Semitism does actually bother him. I believe that. It's probably true. But meanwhile, you're not smart enough, apparently, to stop saying this stuff on stage, or at least take a second to understand what you're talking about, rather than just spouting talking points. Your apology came with more pressing into that world, leaning into the anti-Semitism. Needless to say, I was incredibly disappointed by this response. It really didn't hit the mark. This whole all lives matter, I care about everybody equally, followed by just focusing on one issue, really didn't do it. And I don't think I'm going to go back to listening to his music anytime soon. And just for the record, I'm not calling for people to stop listening or cancel him or never let him show his face in public again. That's definitely not my thing. I'm just saying that I'm going to choose not to do it. There are plenty of Israeli artists that I'd be more than happy to listen to their music and give them the views and support them. But this entire episode is not going to be about Dave Matthews. It's about the issue of all lives matter. The downplaying of anti-Semitism and the downplaying of the issues the Jewish people face because you can pretend like we care about everybody equally, ignoring the anti-Semitism. And nothing is a better example of this all lives matter situation than when the Canadian government recently came out with a brand new program to supposedly fight anti-Semitism. Almost 2 weeks ago now, the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, arrived at a Toronto Jewish synagogue in order to put out a statement about how he plans to fight the hundreds of % increase in anti-Semitism. Here's a piece of a statement that he made to the Toronto and Canadian Jewish community.
As one of our communities is being particularly and brutally targeted. Across our country, Anti-Semitism has surged to levels not seen in the post-war period. Last year, over 2/3 of all religion-motivated hate crimes were directed at Jewish Canadians, who make up only 1% of the population. Anti-Semites in Canada have fired bullets at Jewish schools. They have thrown firebombs at synagogues. They've attacked community centers. They've targeted Jewish-owned businesses, harassed Jewish patients at hospitals, drove Jewish students from common spaces on our university campuses. They have desecrated our Holocaust memorials. Canada's civic compact is failing Jewish Canadians. I'm pleased to announce today the launch and the membership of Canada's new Ministerial Advisory Council on Rights, Equality and Inclusion. The Council has a clear mission to combat racism and hate in all their forms, and to guide the Government of Canada as part of our efforts to build a fairer, more just, more inclusive society.
Did you catch that? After this long speech about all of the issues the Jewish community are facing and how the government is going to fight anti-Semitism in their country, they set up an advisory council to look at all hate. I'm not exactly sure why you wouldn't set up a council to look at anti-Semitism, maybe talk to rabbis and local people in order to solve the issue of anti-Semitism, why you're setting up a council for just all lives matter. Everybody needs to be a part of it. Obviously, and just like the all lives matter thing I talked about earlier, of course there are other issues within society, aside from anti-Semitism. But you came there specifically to talk about anti-Semitism, and your solution to fix anti-Semitism is to do a little bit of anti-racism in general? This is exactly what happened when the Black Lives Matter movement started, saying, please care about Black lives. And some of the world said, well, we only care about everybody's lives, so you get in line behind everybody else. And now we're seeing anti-Semitism on the rise, and the response from the Canadian government is, sure, no problem, get in line with everybody else. How do you solve anti-Semitism in Canada? With looking into everybody else. And what is even worse about this issue, aside from the fact that clearly they are trying the all lives matter tactic here, by just putting anti-Semitism under the rug with everything else, despite the fact that, as he said, it's the worst form of religious-based hate, but it doesn't deserve its own committee, is the fact that one of the people he put on this council that's supposedly supposed to deal with all hate, but especially anti-Semitism, is a literal alleged anti-Semite. One minister of parliament that Mark Carney had put on this council for anti-racism and anti-Semitism is a person who literally served as a president to the Canadian Arab Federation and actively lobbied against Canada designating Hamas, Hezbollah, and Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigade as terrorist entities. He supports terrorists, anti-Israel terrorists. This same person who is on a council supposedly to look into and solve the issue of anti-Semitism mourned the death of the PLO leader Yasser Arafat, praising him for a, quote, tremendous role in highlighting the Palestinian struggle for independence, aka supporting a terrorist. But most interestingly, in 2005, he publicly criticized the Toronto police chief for participating in a walk for Israel and showing his support to the Toronto Jewish community, something that is apparently a big problem for this Minister of Parliament who's now in charge of dealing with anti-Semitism. There are many more accusations that are made against this MP, but it's just quite interesting to see that he has been added to a all lives matter style council in order to, what I would assume, is justify and find excuses for why the government can continue to ignore the anti-Semitism in the streets. As Mark Carney pretends to care about anti-Semitism, rather than using the laws that are currently on the books now, he is putting a bunch of people, including a known alleged anti-Semite, into a panel to tell him how to deal with anti-Semitism. This really is no different than the Dave Matthews clip that I showed. You say a few nice words about the Jewish community, you say that you don't mean to be anti-Semitic, but on the other hand, you support the anti-Semitic ideas that are causing the problems in your country. Mark Carney and the Liberals have ignored anti-Semitism, have fueled it by making completely outrageous statements about Gazan genocides, calling Israel out publicly for claims that are completely untrue, like in 2025, when Carney made a statement claiming that Israel is violating international law when it comes to humanitarian aid, ignoring completely the fact that that's an inaccurate statement and removes Hamas from the equation altogether. This is exactly what fuels the anti-Semitism that we see in the streets. People in power, like a prime minister of a country, making completely debunked claims in order to demonize Israel, which then leads to anti-Semitism. Just like Dave Matthews said, I don't mean to be anti-Semitic, I'm just sharing my anti-war ideology. But if people use that in the wrong way, that's kind of not my fault. Here we have Mark Carney, who has made openly, factually inaccurate and misleading claims to the Canadian people. And after you've now caused an increase in anti-Semitic acts in your own country, you also decide not to actually punish the people who are caught being anti-Semitic in your country, whether it's on the street corners in Toronto or even one of the Gaza flotilla people. Among the flotilla members who were arrested for illegally breaking an internationally recognized blockade, Mark Carney decided to release a statement claiming that Israel is mistreating those Canadians. Never once called out a Canadian citizen for breaking international law and going across the world in order to be arrested on purpose. Common sense might be to suggest to tell your Canadian people, don't go and break international law. We won't help you. That's your own fault. But of course he can't do that because he is leaning into the anti-Semitic, anti-Israel ideology. It just comes down to numbers, really. In the end, this whole all lives matter thing started with Black Lives Matter, when people were saying there are legitimate concerns in the Black community about systemic issues with policing and many other things. And in response, people who didn't want to deal with the issues of anti-Black racism, where it did exist, they made up this all lives matter idea, where we can just take those issues that are legitimate, put them under the rug, mix them up with everybody else, and essentially ignore them. You are downplaying the reality, which is that community's struggle, who deserve to have their struggle talked about and dealt with. And similarly, we're seeing the exact same thing happen now. Those same people, often liberals, who said that Black lives mattered and that all lives matter was not right and it was not fair and it took away from the Black community's legitimate issues, are apparently doing the exact same thing right now to the Jews. When anti-Semitism is on the rise, we will just stick it into a committee with all other people so we can ignore it. And we will put someone on that committee to ensure that we don't actually deal with the issue of anti-Semitism. We'll do like this all lives matter, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism thing. So that way we can put them all together and not deal with either. And incredibly, the Canadian government is even being called out by a Muslim Canadian group petitioning them over their toothless liberal advisory committee on anti-Semitism. Can you imagine how bad you have to be at fighting anti-Semitism that the Arabs and the Muslims in Canada are calling you out for it? According to one of the organizers, they said, and I quote, "This appointment was a slap in the face to the Jewish Canadians and anybody who cares about actual human rights." These two examples, one of an entertainer and a musician and the other of a prime minister of a country, showing that all lives matter is more important than fighting the anti-Semitism that we are seeing, being unable or unwilling to speak about the fact that anti-Semitism is a massive issue in the world right now, and using and lending your voice to fight it, but instead choosing to just focus on everybody, so that way nothing gets done. It essentially is just ignoring the Jewish community's concerns completely. And by anybody attempting to do an all lives matter situation about anti-Semitism, you're really just showing that all lives don't matter, especially the Jewish ones. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.